Hello and welcome to Galena LitFest. This is our third event out of eight for this year. You can find information about all the other ones on our website, galenalibrary.org, if you're interested in any of that. And as we're doing these programs, a lot of them are being recorded and posted to our YouTube channel. So you can also go to YouTube to look at any past events that we've had so far this year. My name is Larissa Disler, and I'm the Adult Services Librarian at the Galena Public Library in Galena, Illinois. And have been running LitFest for 11 years now. So we've had such a great opportunity to have so many great authors throughout the years, including our presenter tonight, who we'll introduce very shortly. First, I just want to go over some housekeeping. Please use the chat to ask any questions or make comments. We'll address those at the end of the presentation. And please be kind and respectful in that chat window. Anyone being otherwise will be removed. This program is being recorded. Like I've mentioned, it will be posted to our Galena Public Library YouTube channel. And I want to thank the Friends of the Galena Public Library for funding this event series each year. We wouldn't be able to do it without them. And I want to thank all of you for being here because, of course, if no one attended anything, no one would fund us. So thank you so much. So I am going to introduce Tia Levings, the New York Times bestselling author of A Well-Trained Wife, her memoir of escape from Christian patriarchy. She writes about the realities of religious trauma, evangelical patriarchy, and the trad wife life, decoding the fundamentalist influences in our news and culture. Her work and quotes have appeared in Teen Vogue, Salon, Newsweek, and the Huffington Post. She also appeared in the hit Amazon docuseries Shiny Happy People. Based in Raleigh, North Carolina, she is mom to four incredible adults and loves to travel, hike, paint, and daydream. You can find her on social media at Tia Levings Writer. And her second book, I Belong to Me, will release on May 5th, 2026. So without further ado, welcome, Tia.
Hi, thank you everybody for being here. This is a good turnout. I'm very excited to support libraries. If you follow my social media, you know I get very, very excited anytime I see a well-trained wife in a library sleeve because it's like a personal redemption for me. I can hardly believe that I'm in the library. I wasn't allowed to go to libraries for a certain portion of my marriage, but they were really important to me growing up. And so this was an easy yes, and I was very excited to do it. I'm going to be adapting tonight a story workshop that I recently did on story wounding. It is a part of the new book, I Belong to Me, and I'm going to read a section from that tonight. As far as I know, a story wound is my own IP. I haven't ever heard anybody talk about it or, no psychiatrists or anything mention story wounds. But in my work with survivors, it's the thing that comes up probably the most. Um, Either some variation of, I have a story to tell and I don't know how, I don't know if it's important, I don't know what format or distribution to use. But then also voice. And when you come from an environment where you feel like your voice has been suppressed or altered, that can take a lot of forms in the Christian patriarchy. If you read A Well-Trained Wife or you follow my work online, you know I talk about fundy baby voice a lot. This is my normal, natural voice, but it wasn't the voice that I used when I was a fundamentalist. I had trained my voice to come up higher, to sound sweet and childlike. I was afraid to offend people. I was afraid to make people uncomfortable or overstep a boundary or misrepresent a faith group. And I always had other people ahead of my own interests and ahead of myself. So that will also alter the things that you say and the things that you feel like you can share. There's a chapter in I Belong to Me early on called What If I Get in Trouble for Telling? And we actually had a conversation, me and my editor, about this because she was like, I'm concerned that that's a youthful way to ask that question. Like, are adults really afraid they'll get in trouble? And I fought for it and defended it. I didn't have to fight very hard because we have a great relationship. But I knew that survivors, trauma survivors in particular, we harbor a lot of like self-policing fears that keep us quiet and keep us from sharing our stories. And we use that language. What if I get in trouble for saying this? What if my family doesn't like what I say? What if my church gets offended? What if I hurt someone that's important to me or a cause that's important to me? And I know women who are in their 60s and their parents have been gone for a long time and they are still afraid to talk about what happened to them in childhood. It is legitimately hard to find the words and the language to convey a story. And that's true if you just want to say it in therapy or the truth in your own head, let alone write a memoir. So I'll give you first a little background into A Well-Trained Wife. Um, Book number one, which at the time I thought would be my only, wasn't sure this was going to work. And I wasn't sure that this was going to like launch a writing career. So I was really surprised when that when that happened. Um, it took me 10 years to write A Well-Trained Wife. And I'm going to click OK on this recording so it's not blocking my screen. There we go. I started writing it as a therapeutic journal. I was trying to find the words and the language for what had happened to me, and I didn't know how to say it. I didn't know how to explain it to people. And I had to at the time. The stakes were very high. It was not just like for me to know like what my story is and um, why it's important or why I felt like it mattered. I needed to tell my story because I was working with law enforcement and custody evaluators and the psychologists. And so if you can't say what happened to you, if you can't use the actual words and language for what happened, that really debilitates your ability to self-advocate. So I was going through this process of I was very sick, physically sick as a result of the trauma that I had been through. And I had started seeing this therapist as a way to deal with being sick, like journal your experiences for like stress relief. And then as a result of that, I was starting to say on the page what happened, which was not really out loud, but it was like the first time I was putting language to an experience without trying to make it pretty or passive or buffer the truth of what it was. I'd always wanted to be a writer, so I was working on other books at the time, and I was working with writing coaches at the time. And one of my coaches was very frustrated with me. She had no religious background whatsoever, and she got very frustrated working with a Christian patriarchy story because she felt like it was depressing and upsetting, coupled with what was happening in the world. And so she would get very frustrated when we'd have our sessions, and I would bring it up because she wanted to just talk about my fiction project. And I was brimming. You know how it is when you feel like you have this story inside of you and you can't contain it, or it comes up constantly. Venting is actually a red flag, a sign that you're experiencing trauma, that you're venting something that's chronic, because you can't change it, because there's nothing you can do about it but, bitch to your friends or, just word vomit all the time that when you talk about it, that's actually a tell that something very chronic has happened, very complicated. And so she said one day, you just need to write that story and get it off your chest. And I was like, oh, really? And she said, yes, put everything you're working on aside and work full time on this. So that's how A Well-Trained Wife was born. It was originally, the working title was The American Burqa, because I used to say the American burqa, the denim jumper is the American burqa. That didn't age well, and it does ring Islamophobic today. But at the time, and we were in the Gulf War, and the evangelicals around me were very upset about what was happening in the Middle East and did not see that this very same thing was happening in their midst, and that I didn't have any of the rights or freedoms that the others didn't have as well. Like we weren't fully cloaking our faces and things, but the extremism and the fundamentalist purity rules were the same. So they changed the title. I sold it on the 10th draft. We wrote three more after that because I had a massive life change at the time that I sold my book and had to write a new ending. I also added all of the healing portion. So the last 25% of the book, um, I was kind of still living through the sales process and went away by myself to finish it in the mountains, which was a great experience and has made this book a standout in the field of trauma memoirs because many of them don't spend very much time on the recovery. That led to the sale of this book because that's what everybody asks for. But how did you heal? When I got out of high control religion and I escaped that marriage and I was putting myself back together, I thought the hardest parts were behind me. I had lived through such harrowing violence and I had, done so many dramatic things to get to safety. And I didn't know that the hardest parts were still ahead of me because I had no sense of self coming out of that environment. I looked like a 33-year-old adult with four children, but I couldn't conduct myself that way. And I was in a lot of shock and ongoing trauma aftermath at a time when there was barely any vocabulary for it. There was not deconstruction and religious trauma and hashtags and terms where I could like go Google it and find it. I was kind of trailblazing. Um, so I had to develop a person. Indoctrination completely interferes with self-development and child development. So I had to undo that and do it late. And what I love about that part of my story is that I am convinced anybody can do it, even late. Like it's never too late if you want to heal or put yourself back together. You can't always redeem your experiences and get your time back. You can't undo the past, but you have a lot of say in changing the future. And then I hope that that's the outcome of the book itself. The third book recently sold, so there's going to be a trilogy. That one's called How to Leave Anything, and it's going to be a collection of interviews from people who've left all kinds of environments, from relationships to toxic cults to rooms that you want to get out of. Because I think that once you have a skill set for fight or flight, freeze or fawn, our trauma responses, they also become our superpowers. And I think there are some people who are very, very good at adapting survival skills into their everyday lives so that they never again are in rooms that make them self-betray or make them less than or smaller than, they have a right to be. So, about how long ago was it? Maybe 5 years ago, someone sent me this very common Brene Brown quote, which I thought was totally preposterous at the time. It's one day you will tell your story of how you overcame what you went through, and it will become someone else's survival guide. And I dug that quote out again because I was doing a story wound workshop recently, and I was like, oh my God, it's true. Like, people tell me that all the time. They're like, your book gave me hope. I saw myself in your pages. Me too. It's one of the first things I learned about sharing my story is that I thought I would be all alone out here talking about this really extreme, harrowing stuff and that nobody would be able to relate to it. And the exact opposite has been true. The most harrowing scenes have people in my DMs saying, I'm so glad you said that happened because it happened to me too. And I had no idea anybody would talk about it. More commonly, there's enough parallel to where people feel like they relate to some level of it, even if we didn't take the exact same path down the road. And I have learned, that's been my lesson, that when I have the courage to say something, when I go ahead and say it, which I'll come back to in a second, but when I go ahead and say it, I'm creating space for someone else to stand in that truth as well, or to like say something that they had a hard time saying first. Someone else can go first. Incidentally, some of the things I used to get in trouble for as a kid were blurting, being impulsive, speaking over, interrupting. Those two are superpowers when you know how to use them for the purpose that you're working towards. So I draw from that a lot. How can I reclaim or reframe experiences that people criticized me for or struggled with or thought were character flaws that have actually turned out to be really powerful strengths and assets out here? Um, a question that I get a lot: does every story matter? Does your story matter? Did my story matter? I can tell you I was utterly convinced mine wouldn't, um, especially in any kind of public facing way. I originally for the first, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, only wanted to know my story for my own psychological benefit. I was working so hard at being a person, being a good mom, trying to heal before my kids grew up. That was really hard for me. My kids were 10 to 2 when we left. And so I was healing, doing all of my trauma therapy work while they were becoming teenagers and leaving. And I realized, oh my God, they're going to grow up before I'm whole. And I was racing against the clock for that, which is a grief that's just real. Like, we don't, this is one of the travesties of trauma is that it takes your time and it takes your years. And we all carry those wounds. We all carry bruises and things that should have been or that happened. Like there's the wound that happened to you, but then there's also everything that should have happened to you that couldn't because of what did. So, we have to navigate that kind of landscape, and it's all very unique. And that can be hard to think, well, is my story going to even matter on a wider scale? Why should I try to have a voice and share my story? I also thought my story was very dark and negative, and nobody would want it. I didn't dare utter the things that are in my book that I talk about all the time now. Were once things I was afraid to say within my own head, between my own two ears. I did not want to say, for example, that I had been spanked. I had only learned the word marital rape, pretty early in that process. There were scenes in my book that I wrote and breezed past them in my consciousness. And then when I worked with my coaches, they would go back and they'd say, well, you remember that first time you were assaulted? And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, that scene is a sexual assault. And I'd be like, it is? Like I wasn't getting it, even writing it. But it's that collaborative process of going through the emotions and going through the story and the writing process that helped me understand the context and the severity, which meant once you can answer honestly for what it is, now you can actually work on debriding it and healing it. I think we spend a lot of time in self-denial or wishful thinking of a different kind. Like we don't always wish that it wouldn't happen because we know we can't, but we might wish we can minimize it and wish that it's not as serious as it sounds. Incidentally, there are three other trauma responses that are being considered for inclusion in the DSM right now. And one of them is fine. I'm fine is a trauma response. It's a shutdown. It's a wall that says, nothing's wrong here. You're not getting to me. You're not getting through to me. And I had never thought of it as a trauma response, but it will absolutely help you survive. And I understand why my brain would reach for it when it doesn't want that thing to be true. And it doesn't want it to be as severe as it might sound if I write it in black and white. I was at the time also telling myself all kinds of stories in my head about my own life and my own narrative and my own experiences. And these are the stories that we tell ourselves, like we build our own inner narratives and sometimes we don't question them. And this is, again, one of the best strengths about writing is that you can look at it on the page and you can see it more objectively. And then you can question it, you can interrogate it, you can put it into context, build out the scene, add the players, add the location and the setting and the time period and all the different things. I have a whole interrogation process and I Belong to Me because I think that when we center ourselves or we only see it from behind our eyes or we're listening to other people's projection of an experience, we aren't necessarily paying attention to the other details in the room or the other like really important aspects like who witnessed this, who could have advocated on my behalf, who could have stopped this. um, we might get hung up on a detail, as we're fixated on it and missing a broader picture. So those are some of the things that were happening with writing. But I was also silencing myself, curating myself, self-censoring because I didn't want to get in trouble. I didn't want to offend anybody or hurt anybody or make them angry. Um, it took me a very long time to learn that the heart of recovery is the awareness that my story mattered to me. And at the end of the day, if that's as far as it went, it never became a memoir. It never became anything I talked about online. Um, it mattered to me because I mattered. And that's the point when my story became a matter of self-worth. I had to prioritize my own strength, health, and healing, which meant I had to take my story seriously. I had to take how I got there, what I had carried away from it with me, what I was still repeating, what I was complicit in. All of that had to be contended with in order to truly value my integrity and myself and my hope for healing to go forward. So I came to call this my story wound. This is I was harmed through stories and religion, and I was also liberated through storytelling after religion. So um, the story wound, like my education wound, these are like themes and through lines that I carry through in my life, that I wanted to um, truly address. And I came up with this definition for it. A story wound is the injury we carry from the message that someone else's story or perspective is of higher value than our experience, and that we must sacrifice ourselves to uphold their narrative. It's also the damage done to us via stories to silence and shame us into making that sacrifice. So, I can't see your faces, but if any of you come from big families, you'll be very familiar with some other family member's version of history being more important than your own. If you have a complicated relationship with your parents, you'll be very familiar with that, of their interpretation is more important than yours. And it takes real self-advocacy to say, my version is important to me, end of story. Like, and theirs is to them. Like, it helps us draw that boundary in between us. You might have a story wound if I'll give you some little pointers, like to bullet points to um, see if you can relate to these. If you worry about rejection or anger from specific people, if you were to ever tell your version of your story publicly, like worrying about blowback and worrying about death threats or libel suits or anything that it would be very specific to a person. If you've been penalized in some form for being vocal, and this is clearly a hot topic right now in our country as we have rising free speech issues, um, and fascism that's rising. So penalized for being vocal is a real concern. Um, if you're known for being blunt or outspoken and you've learned to keep your mouth shut as a result, there's probably some story wounding going on. If you're waiting until someone dies to tell your story, you'd be surprised how often I hear this one. Someone will say, I have to wait till my parents die before I can write my story. And I'm going to hopefully get into that a little bit, waiting period thing, but that is something that comes up a lot. If you can't get started because your success would mean exposure that you're not sure of how you'll handle. So this is for the people who don't want to get started because they think, what happens when I'm a New York Times bestseller and I can't handle that? Like they go 500 steps forward and say they can't take step one because they don't know how they're going to handle step 500. Um, that that's a technique, that's a distancing that your body is doing, that your psyche is doing in order to help you cope with a wound, a fear-based wound. If it feels like your story is something that no one else will understand, like it's so unique and so unbelievable that no one else is going to understand it. The reason why I think that's a story wound is because we get very individualistic in our pain, and then we're not looking at patterns and we're not looking at systems and how we were impacted by outside sources. I think once you start looking at the outside systems that we are all a part of, you start to really see what's your part and what's someone else's part. And your story actually starts to become a little less unique, which means, like, if you want to share it in any kind of written form, you now have something that's timely and relatable, and you can answer the question, why me and why now? That's very important if you're going to try publishing. Um, if you've ever been criticized as being dramatic or negative or stuck in the past, those are silencing techniques, which are story wounds. If you can feel in your body that something is there, but you can't find the words to describe it, that's a hardcore story wound right there. What took your words? We are all as little children. It's like very similar to art. We all have curiosity and exploration, and we all try to describe and story tell as children. And at some point, we're changed, and that is taken from us. Um, so getting into that is usually some deep psychological work. I talk a lot about silence culture because that's what I come from in high control religion. We were very much expected to stay silent, and if we couldn't say anything nice, don't say anything at all was the little pair, what are they called, platitudes that spread that. And so it gaslights our memories and it bypasses our pain. I have a chapter in here. I already told you that about what if I get in trouble, but the question I ask now is when there's silence culture, when anytime it's revealed, who's benefiting from that silence? Like there's some very famous quotes that silence benefits the oppressor, and it's true. Um, Silence also benefits the complicit. Silence benefits the people with no tolerance who they don't have any capacity for discomfort. Um, they want pretty things around them. They don't want any negativity around them. They don't want to have to deal with something that might require change or effort. And so silence in that case is easier. So some messages that might come through silence culture is telling you that that's dangerous to talk about. You'll get in trouble. We don't allow that. That's unpleasant. We don't air our dirty laundry. That's a popular one. Um, why are you so negative all the time? That's none of your business. That's not important. Oh God, that's not important. I mean, if it's changed you and it's wounded you and you're carrying that scar, it's important. And the fact that it isn't important to someone else is also a tell for another problem. When we live in fascism, we live in very harried political times. Um, Rewriting history and reprioritizing whose voice gets to speak is another kind of silence culture. I like what fantasy writer Sebastian de Castell said. Churchill is often misquoted for this, but his history is written by the victors. We're changing that. Survivors get to write and tell. It doesn't have to be the victors as far as our oppressors. It can be the victors, as in the survivors, writing and telling. The truth reveals itself with the people who have the courage to reveal what that experience was really like. And survivors reclaim the truth of history. So I just recently was in an interview this week for CNN. It'll be out in February. And this was a hallmark of it. This was a major through line, was the idea that a reality check is needed when we're talking about ideologies and fundamentalist ideals like the trad wife life, like purity culture, anything that promises a beautiful ideal and a formula of steps that you have to follow. They always focus on the pretty outcome that you'll get if you live this way. And they silence any survivors, any outliers, any exiles. So you don't get to hear the reality check of, was that how it works out? Because I want to know that before I'm deciding how I'm going to live, how I'm going to raise my kids, how I'm going to face a major decision like their health care. We have the benefit of history on our side in a lot of these situations where we have already lived that way before. We already know what it's like to be Puritans and 1950s housewives and antebellum people in the South. Like we know this lifestyle and we have an option to go back if we're going to listen to what it was really like. As long as we're chasing ideals, we fall into this trap of, well, we can make it better this time. Because one of the things fundamentalism does is it pins the blame on the user. So if something goes wrong, it's that person's fault. Oh, you just had a sad marriage. You just had a bad husband. It's not the system's fault. So reality checks and survivor stories are really important, especially when they're like en masse, because they show the volume of, no, actually, this is not the fruit of that ideology. When you actually live this way and it manifests this way in your home, it is not the outcome that they promised. And so now people are empowered, to make a better choice. I am very excited about the amount of deconstruction books on the shelf right now, trauma memoirs, and one of the reasons why I'm so excited is we have this trad wife movement where these little kids, are being like exploited online and their moms are making money and toting the simple life. There's like big hypocrisy in the trad wife movement. But what we're gonna have is an exodus of kids. In 10 years, we're gonna see an exodus of those kids leaving their parents because that's what happens. And, we know generations tend to rebel against what their parents did, and they're going to be looking for these materials. So you don't know if you're sitting there wondering, should I write my story? You don't know who might need it in 10 years. This is your call. I think anybody who has that question, like, should I write my story? Your answer is yes. You would not be like burdened with that question and weighing it and holding it in your heart unless the answer was yes. What you're going to do with it and what that looks like for publication or distribution is a completely different matter. But as for writing it, um, get it out of your system. You know, there's so much to be said for putting it on the page, getting it out of your body. When I read my audio, it then belonged in an audio file too, told in my own voice. So then I didn't have to carry it in my system anymore. I could externalize it. I have these little slides for silence culture messages to overcome, but they're printed in grayscale with white ink, and there's no way for me to actually read them. So, unless, let me try this. I have to try this. Oh, that helps. Okay. All right. So you're silencing your inner critic. If you have, these are internal obstacles to silence culture. So I handled the ones that are the external ones that we might hear from, the peanut gallery, the people who don't want us to talk. This is from our inner voice. Um, that's not good enough. Your trauma isn't as bad as someone else's. We get into comparison a lot. Quantifying trauma is one of the opening chapters of I Belong to Me. You can't put perfect, you can't put imperfect work out in the world. Um, Perfectionism will definitely keep you silent. Old villains who want you like questioning you like in your head because we adopt our villains' voices in our heads. You're not really going to say that out loud, are you? No one's going to love you if you write that. That's not a real job. And then my favorite, imposter syndrome. You're not a real writer. You need an MFA. No one's going to read that. You're probably the narcissist. Those are examples of ways I self-censored. I have heard other survivors self-censor that way. Um, and I can say that I probably dealt with the equal parts psychology and writing. They really were tandem works for me, and I think they complement one another really well. IFS work, which is internal family systems, is very good at helping you identify whose voice was that? Where have I heard that before? How old was I when I heard that the first time? Why would I be afraid of that when I'm so far away and distant from the experience? Um, Trauma wounds and story wounds can take us all the way back to childhood, to our earliest language expressions and attachments. And you might have begun throttling your story back as early as a preschooler, like the first time you started forming knowledge and language, because we say no, as preschoolers. And then we're taught you don't say no to adults, you have to say yes. And we're taught to suppress our feelings and sit still. So then you start realizing what stories get you in trouble and which ones make adults smile. And you start naturally curating. And when you're hurting and you're trying to hold this burning hot story inside of you, the coping mechanisms to help you manage the pain sometimes can be very destructive to the writing process. Sometimes they can just hold it on ice. But nothing's going to actually heal and relieve it until you actually find your voice and put it out. I'm careful when I say find your voice because that's a very incremental process, in my opinion. Um, I think we start with whispers, we start with little words, we start with little sentences. Um, Shy, not very good writing for a while, not sure of ourselves, and that imposter syndrome is, always there. I'm working on a novel right now. I have imposter syndrome very badly, and I am fighting very hard to not self-edit on the page to tell this story. Um, Other coping mechanisms that you might be pulling from look like substance abuse, overwork, avoidance, perfectionism. Um, I just think that anytime we can express it and we relieve ourselves of the pressure, we are freer to breathe. And only good can come from that. Like if you're wondering, will it be worth it? Being able to breathe better is a good payoff. Being healthier and less bound by an old narrative. Um, Being free to parent differently because you've released old restrictions and old like critics, or fear-based messaging that you've been carrying in your body. I think all of that is a worthwhile way to find ways to get this out. And it doesn't have to come through your mouth in oration. this is the power of writing. It allows us to do something that can be very interior and very quiet, but then have the ability to do this. The fact that I'm doing this right now is a miracle of writing because when I left in 2007, I stuttered so badly. I couldn't order a pizza. I couldn't order takeout. I couldn't talk to a bank teller without stuttering, getting all heavy, crying. I was so afraid to interact with the outside world. And this is the progress that I can sit on a screen where I can't even see your faces and talk coherently, and do this work and all the work around the work because there is the book, and then there's all the things that you've heard in my bio, but that I do every day as part of the work that's around the work to help promote it and educate on the very timely issue, Christian patriarchy. I first realized I wanted to tell this and publish it and distribute it widely because it was coming for our country. That's when it was like, I can't just tell this for myself in my journal. I need to get it out because I want other women to know what we're actually dealing with here. And so I had to learn. I had to work with a vocal coach. I got speech therapy. I had to practice bringing myself down into my own register. And I had no idea the impacts of that. My sex chapter in I Belong to Me isn't like anybody else's sex chapter, y'all. It is about voice because voice and sexuality are very tied, which is also why the patriarchy wants you to sound like a little girl. That's why Fundy Baby Voice truncates women to sound like little girls, and behave like little girls that don't have any agency and are completely dependent. So I want to talk a little bit about boundaries. Boundaries were a tool that I used to break free. Um, it's a lot at once. I think one of the things that holds us back is a fear of being absolutely flooded by the veracity of our story or a traumatic tidal wave that we can't handle. Um, I used several boundaries to help me pace and titrate. Um, I was very aware that stories have manipulative power. So I'm going to read to you in a second. I think we have time. Yeah, we have time. Um, I'm going to read to you what I thought about Bible stories and how they were manipulative to me, um, and how I had to watch out for that when I was writing because I had to value my story over someone else's in order to get my story out. And that surprised me that it dealt with uh, Bible stories, but it absolutely did because my head was riddled with them. And they are all, very moralistic and righteous and slowly, like almost a personal propaganda, teaching me to curate or be quiet instead of get it out and express it. It's not doing any harm to anyone on the page, and it's actually helping me. Um, so I had to set aside my religious experience in order to do this. I had to say, God, you are so big. You can handle me. You can handle this. You can handle me setting it aside for a second and writing here and trust that anything that was happening with me in a religious framework was not threatened by the fact that I was doing this thing on the paper. I wasn't trying to sin or be, hurtful in any way. I needed to just get this out. And um, so that was one of the things to do. I'm tripping up a little because I think I should just read the section to you. It has a little tale of when I was a little girl. Um, yeah, and so you can see it's like towards the back of the book. So the way this book works is that it traces the 10 years I healed, but it's written in a general way so that it applies to everyone and only uses my own experience as the spine or as a fodder for examples. So the first part is shock and the aftermath and all the different ways you pull yourself out of something. In the back half of the book is into the more um, nitty-gritty, really deep issues in healing that I've seen and experienced that I haven't seen in anybody else's books. Like it's a self-help book, but it's also not written in a prescriptive voice. And I didn't see it in anybody else's books. So I wanted to change that. Have some water. And I'm trying to leave some time for Q&A too. So I think we'll do that right after I read this. Yeah, I just have a little piece on nostalgia. Okay, the story wound. If I have any constant addiction in my life, it's to stories. I love telling them, reading them, and watching them. I'm a film buff and a voracious reader. Books have sustained me through some of my darkest hours, educated me, and entertained me. I could have never written a book about recovery without honoring the books that brought me here. I Belong to Me is a love letter to literacy, and to me, reading is a sacred act. It's almost an indescribable honor to have my books on the shelf next to other books I love. Little me is in awe of adult me. We made it to the library. Our book gets a shiny sleeve. Readers highlight the lines and dog ear the pages. She within me is delighted. Jazz hands for days. So please believe me when I say how much I loathed the stories I heard in Christianity, how much fierce fire I hold against the harm those stories caused and continue to cause. It takes courage from all my parts to write those words because this is a vulnerable admission of my shadow. Protector parts within me are wielding fiery swords on guard to protect me from response. We aren't supposed to admit we don't like Bible stories. It's dangerous to say, I reject the Jesus story as the greatest story of all time, and it feels like risk to trust that readers know that rejection is separate from faith or Jesus himself. But I have a deep, deep story wound I had to heal, inflicted by groomers, and it's directly related to light versus shadow, personal responsibility, good versus evil, and how I developed emotional boundaries against manipulation. This work is the heart of my story, as well as my reclamation, and I hope I tell it with tenderness and love. My story wound is multifaceted and multi-layered, but as I explored it, I found a definite starting point. The setting is a square brick building in the middle of a flat Midwestern field that housed Hillside Christian Academy or some such school by a similar name. I was there as a preschooler into kindergarten program because I was bright and my district was too small for a gifted program. So my mother placed me in a variety of kindergartens as a way to keep me challenged. I was the youngest of the class, emotionally immature for the environment, yet bored of the lessons because the others were still learning to read. I have three distinct memories of Hillside that formed scenes still feeding my dreams. The first is that the bulletin board in our dim, wood-paneled classroom was decorated with apples with our names on them. Bad behavior earned a worm in your apple. If you got 5 worms, you were sent to the principal for a spanking. I was sent there often. The second is that the basement lunch cafeteria was loud and unsupervised. Most days I sat there with my snap lid Tupperware lunchbox and ate hard-boiled eggs and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches with my class. But one day I got up and wandered over to an older class and followed them in line to a school bus. I ended up taking a field trip with the big kids. I have no memory of being missed or discovered. The third took place in the morning chapel. True to traumatic memories, my body recalls the sensory details. My brain clocks the external plot. My soul connects this moment to every time I felt this way again, which is probably so many thousands that it's impossible to count. This is a core memory. What happened is that a man, probably the principal, was speaking at the front. A fluorescent light buzzed. The children sat in rows of folding metal chairs. Mine was cold and too big for my body. I had to sit very still to keep my heels from tapping the chair, and sitting still took most of my concentration. My sit bones hurt. I had a children's Bible on my lap, the kind with illustrations breaking up the sections, open to a page showing the Tower of Babel, a spiral stone building reaching to the green and stormy skies. If you don't know, that's a story about mankind building a tower to reach heaven, like a skyscraper. God didn't want them to do this. He didn't want them to cooperate and work together because then humans would have too much power and they wouldn't need God. So he struck the workers with different languages so they'd be too confused to build. And that, boys and girls, is why countries still speak with different languages today, our teachers would say. The preacher teacher wasn't talking about Babel, though. He was talking about something else, trying to sound convincing. My stomach hurt the way it does when I don't like something. To keep myself occupied and still, I was tearing very tiny little pieces of paper out of the corner of my illustrated page and letting the scraps fall like snowflakes to the carpet. I liked how they fluttered down, and I thought of other things that fluttered. dandelion seeds, butterfly wings, dust caught in sunbeams. I made a little pile of papers. My page was torn in half. During a seemingly endless closing prayer, I squirmed with my eyes open and admired my pile. A hand grabbed my thin forearm and wrenched me from my seat. A faceless teacher walked me to the principal's office. He lectured me on defiling the word of God and on my sinful, dirty heart because only a very bad little girl would dare tear a Bible. Then he spanked me. I went back to class with red lines on my legs, feeling embarrassed that he'd seen under my dress. I sat at my desk, folded my arms, and laid down my head, burning into a smolder over all of it. That's not true. Little me indignantly dug in that day with what she knew. The preacher teacher's story wasn't true. The Tower of Babel wasn't true. Adam and Eve wasn't true. God telling Abraham to kill his son wasn't true. The ark full of dinosaurs wasn't true. Jonah in a fish wasn't true. The apples full of worms weren't true. I belong here wasn't true either. To this day, when I hear the word defile, I remember the fleshy palm of that man's hand. I was too young to know that word, yet I understood it. I still flinch if a Bible touches the floor. I doubt I'd ever have the guts to make blackout poetry with canned pages. I've saved every Bible I've ever owned, even though they feel like headstones from my innocence and childhood. But this is the origin of my story wound. It's the answer to the therapist's question, when was the first time you felt this way? It's far from the last. So, as you know, if you've read A Well-Trained Wife, I came around on some of those childhood beliefs. I tried really hard to obey. I bought everything hook, line, and sinker as much as I could. Um, and then I had to unpack it all. And I had to get to a place of like, what do I really believe versus what have I been told I have to believe, and how did it impact me? I think that my page is curling here, so I'm sorry if you can hear that rustling. Finding words is really hard for a lot of writers and tellers. And if you don't know what to call what happened yet, start with your peripheral details and work in. So if you followed that, I started with other memories related to that one that were location specific, but they weren't the story. They weren't the reason why I still have nightmares about that experience. Um, who else was there? What do I taste and smell? The hard-boiled eggs and the peanut butter sandwiches, the apples on the wall, those details all help me get to, okay, but what's my really core memory of Hillside? And why am I still so impacted by it? The other more severe stories that I have in my life were the same format. This is how I came around with marital rape, um, married sex, the way that I had married sex, so different than what I'd heard talked about or discussed. The times that I'd said no, the way that my therapist would hear these stories and meet me with vocabulary that I didn't know existed or was too afraid to use because I didn't want to exaggerate. Once I had a name for an experience, it completely changed the way that I thought about it. And so I was able to like interact with it on an entirely different plane, almost outside of the experience itself, and see if it like matched. Did my experience of non-consensual sex actually match what rape is? And oh yes, that's a perfect circle. Okay, now I need to deal with it differently. Um, all of that helped me be less afraid, helped me find my voice, helped me use my words. True, whether I was speaking it with my mouth or writing it down. I also used an emotional chart. So if you are familiar with like those the wheels that have the synonyms and the different words that you can use, it's like a thesaurus on a wheel. I also use a thesaurus a lot. I tried to stay away from label words like good or bad and instead use words like warm or scary or anxious or hopeful, like really get into what I was feeling in those memories. That all helped me understand how my silence was working, what my voice was doing, like was it changing to please someone else or tell my truth? And I kind of went from there. I had questions. I don't think they printed. There were three. Larissa, do you have the questions? Are you there?
Yep, I'm here. I can
Okay,
pull
good.
them. I can pull them up.
Oh, good, good. I remember one was, do I still have my sense of faith? And my standard answer for that is that I am spiritually private. That doesn't, I think I do like my glasses on. I My answer for spiritual privacy is a refusal to put labels on the fluidity of my faith. I don't want to put myself in a box again. Words change meaning over time. And I also really needed privacy as a little kid. As a 4-year-old is the first time I prayed the sinner's prayer. And that is asking a 4-year-old to decide their spiritual beliefs for the rest of their lives. And it's also very public. And I was mortified as a little sensitive 4-year-old. I did not want to talk about my prayers. And so when I did inner child therapy, that's what I came back with was like, I need to protect her privacy and I need to protect that beliefs are fluid. They are not static. They're not boxed. Um, I might not want to affiliate with the modern American expression Christian. I might have different language for it, but it more than anything is especially the more public my platform becomes, I have to retain that privacy. So what I always do is I ask people to judge me, know me by my fruit, decide for themselves whether I'm worth listening or to or not. It's not an issue so much for secular people who already do that. But Christians are very often taught not to listen to anyone who won't expressly say that they're Christian. That's on them. That's their walk, to determine. But I am not interested in being anyone's guru or being platformed in anyone's box. So it's very important to avoid labels. As far as spirituality goes, I hope it's even evident in that reading that I draw a difference between the stories we tell about religion and what actual belief and faith in the divine and in the wonder and the mystery of creation and the world around us, all of that is separate from the stories that we tell. So, I apologize if that's not a satisfying answer, but it is the one that I use and share from my heart. Let's see here. Yeah. Anyone
Okay.
else have any questions?
I have the email pulled up with that I had sent you the questions
Hmm.
in. The other one of the things was just a comment. It said, "No, I don't have any questions, but I want to say that her strength is admirable." So I just
Thank
wanted
you.
to pass that on to you. And the other question is, did you have to overcome fears about others, family and friends' reactions to write honestly?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so where do I want to start with this? I have like a permanent restraining order against my ex-husband, so there was legal concerns. I also had to pay attention to the actual criteria for slander suits because I named so many pastors and villains in my story. Um, you can't say, if you're saying what's true, they can't argue with that. It's on the burden of proof is on them. They have to prove that you lied, that you did it on purpose, and that you were trying to hurt them. So where I showed that I actually tried to buffer their anonymity and protect it, that I wasn't doing it to cause harm, that I'm actually telling good, doing good work with this story, and that it's true. And my legal read, my publisher put it through a very, very, very vigorous legal read. Every single claim in that book is backed up with a receipt. It's provable in court. So a lot of times slander cases aren't even brought forward because um, attorneys know that. They know if it's been given that kind of legal test, it's already been through the receipt process and we have everything backed up. Um, Personally, family. So I think what holds a lot of writers back is wondering what their friends and family are going to think about it. The shocking truth is, friends and family often don't even read the book. I am still to this day very, very, very surprised that people who are named in the book haven't read it. And they know about it. And maybe they've listened to the audio on the down low, or whatever, but they haven't said anything and they don't want to talk about it. My family is different. My children all knew about it. A couple of them have read it, a couple of them have not. That's very personal preference for them. And my parents, I got to a place where I valued my experiences in my story more than anyone else's opinion of it. That was very powerful psychological work that I did. My mom's only hang up in the whole book is that it sounds like I was married at 19 on Shiny Happy People. And I don't really clarify in the book that I actually turned 20 the year I was engaged. So I was actually 20 when I got married. And of all the things that happened to me in my book, and the things that she didn't know until she read it. Um, that's the one that she got hung up on. And that lesson was to me, you don't ever know what's going to matter to somebody. You never know what's going to be their thing that they're just snagged on. And all I can do is say, my door is always open. We can always talk it through. There's a reason why I did everything. I think that's also one of the benefits of really letting your story cook over time. So you don't re-traumatize yourself in the telling, but you're also able to really um, defend or explain or hold someone else's experiences separate from your own. You know, they're allowed to feel what they feel, and their story is their own. And I was really careful not to tell other people's stories for them. I only told my experience of them and what it was like. So there's not a lot in the book about my kids because that's their story. And there is a lot about motherhood because that's my story. So hope that answers that question well.
Okay, I don't see anything else in the chat, but feel free to drop your questions there, everyone,
Hmm.
please.
You'll have beautiful names. Can't see you, but I can see your names. Thank you, Kayleen. Or Kaylin. Kaylin. Pretty.
I guess I'm wondering, oh, hold on, there's something in here. A friend asked me to ask you if you have an agent. She's finishing a memoir and is a survivor.
Yes, I am agented, and there are a lot of them out there. I think when the step is right, the steps, the provisions are there. So, my agent found me. I was in the middle of querying agents, which is a whole process, and there's shelves of books on how to do this. But I had sent out my queries and my book proposal, and I had a week where there was five that wanted to work with me, and I got to choose, which was like a dream come true. You're really lucky if you get to talk to one. And I was very intimidated by that part of the process, and I thought it was going to be very, very hard. And then it ended up being this like dream courtship week. And I chose the one who chose me. She found me first, and she had offered to have a conversation with me in pursuit of representation. And in the end, she ended up being an author's agent, which means that she's really here with me for the development of my whole career. And that means that she's represented me in multiple works. The books are nonfiction, but I am working on fiction now, and we've also sold the TV rights for A Well-Trained Wife. So she represented me in that. So that's 4 deals in 3 years. My agent works really hard for me, and I very much appreciate her. Yeah, so different coaches. So this question is, I love how you use different coaches and therapists in your recovery journey. Did you find that one type of guidance helped more than the other? For instance, if someone wants to write a trauma memoir, does that person lean towards the writing coach or the therapist? Thank you. So I had the best. Her name is Lisa Ellison Cooper or Cooper Ellison. I always get it backwards. She's a trauma-informed writing coach who specializes in memoir. And I didn't know there was such a thing, until I got involved in this. I started out with a memoir coach. I worked really hard with my therapist throughout, and I had four therapists over those 10 years. Um, but it was working with Lisa, who helped me did a developmental edit of the manuscript that I had in place at that time, and also developed my book proposal. And I did cohort and group classes with her, and I also did one-on-one coaching, and she still offers it. You can look her up online. She's excellent. So I highly, highly recommend that. Also, if you know my story, you know I don't have a formal education. I'm self-educated, and it is my education wound because that's what Christian patriarchy takes from girls. And so coaches help me fill that gap, help me really customize my own education for what I needed it for.
Could you speak a little bit about how to handle yourself when current events are very triggering?
Mm. Yeah, that's
Well,
that's real, right? That's coming for all of us on any given day. I would say this year has been much harder than I had seen. To some extent, there has always been triggers in the mainstream, for me. And I really look at my triggers as information and I don't shy from them. I try to get like, why is this activating me and what can I do about it? Information very quickly from it. This year is different. It's really terrifying on a regular basis. I am regularly worried for the women in particular for the of this country and the children and our ability to hang on to hope. And it's just like living in Christian fundamentalism the first time. So I feel sometimes like everything that I ran away from is here for me, and it's inescapable. And there are so many innocents being harmed through the hateful policies and things that are in place. So what it means is more of the same as far as self-care and nervous system regulation go. They're the same techniques I would use if it was a small threat versus a large threat. Um, I need to be very diligent about boundaries and creating spaces where I can breathe and come down. And it's not for luxury, it's for sustenance and survival. So I work really hard on nervous system regulation, which is a lot of baby habits, like taking care of my body, getting enough sleep, taking showers in the dark, taking my meds, traveling slowly so I'm not rushing. I really resist any kind of urgency. Anything that can help me stay in my body, stay present, keep a sense of perspective. And then also hope. Like it does help having escaped Christian patriarchy once to know, oh yeah, I know how to do this. Like remembering my skill set and the things that I learned the first time around. Like I wrote today on Substack about how we are absolutely going to be okay. One of the things that we know about madmen and narcissists is that when you give them enough leeway, they usually undo themselves. They fall apart. Um, and I do think that that's going to happen. Like unsustainable situations don't sustain. They by nature, because they can't. So keeping that in mind helps me hang on, from day to day. And it is very much do the next right thing and keep going every day and be in community with people that are like-minded and read broadly is the one of the biggest things you can do.
do you have any book recommendations for us?
Well, currently I'm reading this beautiful thing. Ah, it's called Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, Grady Hendrix. I just read How to Sell a Haunted House. I'm also reading Good Morning Monster. These are not like trauma reads. These are what I enjoy reading. What do I have back here? This was really great for misogyny, Christian worldview in this book. It's called For the Love of Women by Dorothy Greco. This one by Soraya Chemley, All We Want Is Everything. This is great for female rage. My favorite old standby in all the world is Shirley Jackson. Here I have Rebecca. If you want deconstruction books, I have them on my website. There's a whole list of religious trauma resources and things you can use for healing.
Did you mention that you were writing fiction?
I am. I have
That's
a
exciting.
gothic true religious horror novel underway that's about babies.
Wow.
That's all I'll say. But it is Southern Gothic and it is true religious horror because I'm not good at making things up. I think the scariest things we have are reality.
What was the process like when you were switching in your mind from writing memoir and to fiction?
Oh, that's the hardest part is making it up. Your own material, you have everything there, you know. It's like just got to tell the truth. I just have to arrange it and make sure that I have timeline's correct, and there's a lot of fact checking involved. And in fiction, um, I'm not good at vengeance because I don't have a vengeful spirit. So that's hard when you're dealing with redemptive character arcs and heroines that need to, you know, do something dramatic in their character arc. Yeah, and just like believing that it's plausible. That's probably my imposter voice the most is like, oh, this is hokey. Well, it's supposed to be. It's first draft, or second draft. But yeah, it's gonna until we get a few drafts into it and an editor. So yeah, it's courage, but it's also fun. And it's where I want to go in the future. I don't think I'm going to be talking about Christian patriarchy, indefinitely because the country's going to move through it. So are we. And we're still going to need fun fiction and stories. So that's always what I've wanted with my career since I was a little kid. So that's what I want to do. Oh, there's a fun question here. If I could write myself as a character in a work of fiction, who would I be? Okay, so I have this YA series that I have. I have this, I wrote about it, I mentioned it in both books. I'm really hoping to finish it. Um, but it's a character who can enter into people's stories. And when they're children, they enter into storybooks and they can interact in the story world. And then when they're intermediate, like middle schoolers, they can enter into news stories and investigations. And then when they're adults, they can enter people's psychology and interact that way. And I'm fascinated with that process. And I would love to be that heroine who can do that. I think it's like the height of empathy.
I had wondered if you had any input on your book covers at all.
Oh, a little. So, it changes hands at the publisher. It goes from the editorial team to the sales team and the designers. So, my editor is the one who came up with the key, the wind-up key. And they presented, she went to the designers and said, here's what I'm imagining, like a non-photograph graphic um, idea. And they wanted this. This was very daring for them because this is not a typical memoir cover at all. Um, and it's more dramatic fiction. And my book reads that way. So they wanted to capture that expectation. And then they bring me an array of designs, and we went from there. With I Belong to Me, this is a fun little story because it was originally called The Soul of Healing, and it had a phoenix. This book doesn't have anything to do with birds. I'm not a bird. I was like, I don't like the title. I don't like the name because I also don't get a ton of say in the titling. So I was like, they're going to want to know that it's related. These books are related to one to another, and they need to be. And so she's like, oh, let's use the figure. So they took the key out of the back, and she's the key. There's the regular traditional key down here because I talk about the keys to healing a lot. Um, and it's the white cover, which is a thing in sales, because it has to pass sales. Like it goes through the editor to the designer to the sales team. If the sales team hates it and doesn't think that it's a product that will move, then it goes back to the drawing board. So it's a little bit of a whole collaboration. And I know authors that really hate their covers and they get to go back and, amend it. They did do that second redesign for me, but not typically. Not tip You get that resource once and, it's an expensive process. So yeah. Who is that figure in? Oh, I like the figure in the denim jumper. Yeah. Yeah. What's funny to me is that I used to wear this color and wear my hair this way. And there's a photograph. If you've seen Shiny Happy People, there's a photograph where I'm standing at the sink, and that is me. And the designer did not know that. It was just this weird coincidence. And I used to have a dress this color. So when I saw this, I was like, okay, like somehow people know me without knowing my pictures or anything. It's like meant to be. Which is when I see it, I'm like, oh, it's meant to be. That's the cover. Thanks, Meg.
All right. Well, that's all the questions that I have. And if it's all the questions that the chat has, we can call it a night. Just give me a
Okay.
moment. Yeah, I thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everyone who attended. And we have more Lit Fest coming up in the next couple of weeks. So take a look at our website for the calendar. And yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. But we'll let Tia get back to her life. So thank you so
It's
much.
an hour later here, so I'm gonna go get ready for bed.
Well, have a good night. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone.